Thank you very much, Paula. So now I'm embarrassed. But it's just so wonderful to be here. And I've never been to Rhode Island. I've been all around, but I never got to be in Rhode Island. And when I was coming in yesterday, I thought, well, I've been missing this beautiful place. So I'm coming back in September for a little vacation. And I think that between the Ryan Institute and the Reynolds Institute, we're going to be doing some really exciting things and maybe get some collaborations going and help each other. And as Paula was saying, we've known each other and talked to each other for a very long time, and both of us thinking about the inflammatory component in the brain. The brain, of course, is different from inflammation in the body. We'll talk just a little bit about that. But what I wanted to do today is talk in just a general way of what's happening in Alzheimer's disease. And so what's happening when you're old but still okay. And here, this old man is, I thought about when I'm at home in Arkansas, I always say, sitting there in his Barca-lounger, because most people in the audience are old enough to know what is a Barca-lounger, but any kind of lounge chair will do. Anyway, he's sitting there and watching TV, and he's reared back, and he's watching this scene on the TV, and it has this girl in the picture. And he thinks to himself, oh my gosh, that is just like my high school sweetheart, Elaine. And he remembers everything. So what happened in his brain, and this is your little neuroanatomy lesson for today. So what's happening in the brain is he sees through the eyes, and that information is carried almost straight back to this area, which is the primary visual cortex. And that's where you see, you take the photograph of. And then that information is sent up to areas where you have some associations between your old memories and the proper thing that you can think about, so you recall and you know we do it all the time. We see something that reminds us of someone, and we get the whole thing. We don't just get their eyes or some attractive feature about them. You get the whole thing. And if you're like Arkansas people, I mean, we hug each other all the time. And we don't like each other, but we hug. But anyway, so you get the whole thing. You know how they feel, you know how they smell, you know how what their skin feels like, everything. And you remember all the intimate details if you had any with them. And so all of these things, those come in through your eyes and of course your ears, the whole thing, and they have their specific regions of the cortex. And so he's seeing this and he thinks, I have to tell someone. And so he thinks about that and he thinks, I'm gonna get up. I've got to tell someone about this because I've got me laying down pat. I remember everything. And so when he thinks that, he thinks, I'm gonna get up. And when you get up, one of the things that is absolutely necessary is to know where your feet are. So he gets, the rest goes down, his feet go on the floor, and that information comes in to sensory cortex, which is right here. So he knows where his feet are. And then he said, okay, so I'm going to start to push off. Now, if you're at the age where you have to push off, I just want to tell you one rule. This is Arkansas rule. And that is, it is okay to push off, but it is not polite to say, when you do. But that's just a rule. Anyway, so he's now started. He's going to step off and go and tell someone. And then this huge area here, which is so important in the brain, because it tells you what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. And it also reminds you when it's the 15th of March that you've got to get your stuff to the CPA and get your taxes paid, by the middle of the next month, and do all the things that you're supposed to do. Well, that kicks in, thank heavens, and the guy realizes that the only person he has to tell is the little lady in the kitchen fixing his dinner. And that is not Elaine. So then everything just reverses. He sits back and his feet come off the floor And the whole thing just reverses, and he just sits there nursing the memories of Elaine. And hopefully gets over it before he goes in to get his dinner. Otherwise, then we'll have the brain of the woman that we could go see what happens there. Anyway, so these are the things when the brain is, when you're old and you're still okay, you've got all your cognitive facilities and hopefully are taken care of them, and that's going to be part of our talk today. So what is necessary in the brain for you to be old and okay, or okay period? It depends on the health of these cells here. These cells are the nerve cells. Usually we refer to them as neurons. And if you do, then you can impress your friends that you went to the talk. So neuron 1 here, neuron 1 actually must speak to neuron 2. And the way it does it is here, the signal, and you can see that little electric spark there. The signal is sent down through this thing called an axon, down to neuron 2, and lands almost on neuron 2, and here it's enlarged so you can see it. And when that electric spark comes down, it causes the release of proteins, and these proteins are called neurotransmitters. And so that's how neuron 1 tells neuron 2 what to do. And there's billions of these. So you can imagine this happening billions and billions and trillions of times in the brain to let these nerve cells talk to each other so that we know what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, how to see, how to jump, how to have joy, the whole thing. And it's dependent on these kinds of actions. And then, so when we think about this and think about everything that has to happen, then we also have to think about something we're going to talk about on the next slide here. And that is, so how do we get these neurotransmitters down to the terminal here, the synapse, that little thing's called a synapse. And the way you do that here, so all this has to be working perfectly, no zits anywhere. And so here you have neuron 1, for example, and all the proteins are governed by the genes, the DNA. And the DNA is, my pointer's not being perfect with me, but the DNA holds the code. It's so amazing. It holds the code for every protein, every aspect of you. The code is laid down. And it's, you know how it's laid down? From your parents. You get one copy of every gene from your mom, and I was cautioned today to say the other copy comes from your real dad. So I don't know what that means in Rhode Island, but I do know what it means in Arkansas. So that's how you get all your genes for everything you do, including what I'm talking to you about here. And so this pathway here, coming down from along the axon, this structure here is the microtubule. And you can see there are bunches of them, many more than pictured here. And that microtubule is like the railroad tracks. So things that are made, the DNA copy here in the nucleus comes out, and the proteins are made here outside the nucleus, and then those proteins are carried down along this railroad tracks by railroad cars. They all have names. And those railroad cars then take them along this microtubule. And the microtubule is held stable, and this is very important because it's not held stable in diseases like Alzheimer's disease. So it's held stable by these blue tacks. And if you were from Arkansas, you would know what a tack is because it's the thing that holds the quilt together, the one that's called the pallet quilt that you can put out on the floor. The bed quilts you can't. But anyway, so they're just tacked together, held two pieces together with these tacks, and that's analogous to what's happening here. And then back to the nerve cell then, so all of this is happening, the DNA in the nucleus, my pointer's not working very well, but the DNA here in the nucleus, coding for the proteins, made out here, carried down along the microtubules, and waiting to be delivered as a response to the electrical signal. And then they're dumped out, and neuron 2 knows what to do. And furthermore, neuron 2 is dependent on neuron 1. And that means that if you keep, when you're losing neuron 1, then neuron 2 is affected and can actually then be damaged and not live. So you can imagine in the billions we have of them, that a cascade of events can then happen. So that was one of the genesis of one of my ideas, which was that, well, that means that there are drivers of what we see at the end of life with Alzheimer's, for example, and all the other neurodegenerative diseases. So when you're old but still okay, everything is copacetic. And this is for the people that were alive in the 60s, when copacetic used to mean everything is just perfect. What starts everything going wrong? And it doesn't have to start everything going wrong, by the way, because we can now know that we can absolutely make our future different. So inflammation is what happens with everything going wrong. And most of us are more familiar with what happens in the joint. This happens to be the knee. What happens in the joint, we know something about that because a lot of people have had problems with their joint and they know how it feels. And so basically how it feels is dependent on this cell right here. And that cell in the joint is a macrophage. Now there's an analogous cell in the brain that I'll show you. But this is an immune cell, and it's so important. And actually, when you have the inflammation in the joint, how you know you have it is this macrophage swells up and releases this small protein here, which is IL-1. That's short for interleukin-1. And when interleukin-1 is released, this action causes the swelling, like in your knee. If you wanted to real bad, you could feel in my knee, it's got a little swollen part right here. So I'm just telling you, swollen and feverish. And this IL-1 really is in charge of the fever part and probably has something to do with the swelling part too. And because one of the reasons it aches is it pushes on other things. So this macrophage here in the knee, so that's the inflammation right there. I told you macrophages, and they get big, and so that means they're activated, and they release this interleukin-1. And it starts a cascade of events that end up, you have feverish feeling in your knee, and it's swollen a little bit. And you have to mind what that woman tells you when you're getting therapy of what you're supposed to do about it, and it gets well faster. So I just want to tell you, in your knee and in your brain, if you just have a little bit of injury and a little bit of inflammation, neuroinflammation in the brain, then that's okay, because that's just an acute thing. So a little something happens, so the neuron is affected a little bit. Then the whole thing in the brain is set up so you can be rescued from that. And this is how it works. And I told you chronic is no way. And so we are not going to let it get to that point here. So an acute injury, just a little bit, like knock off one of those branches on the neuron, and then it can be repaired. So what happens actually, I don't know whether you can see it, but I bet you can. See the neuron here? It's very beautiful, but in this particular case, it's been injured by having Alzheimer's. And here, next to it, do you see that sort of fluffy looking? That is a big cell that's analogous to the macrophage in your knee. And it is called a microglia. So it is really tiny, compared to that neuron when it's not activated. And now you can see that it's huge, and it's pouring out IL-1, interleukin-1. And the acute phase response of the neuron is to make a protein, and that protein is called amyloid precursor protein, but its function in the cell is to repair the membrane, because the membrane has proteins that stick out of it to sort of keep it in line. And one of those proteins that goes through the membrane is the beta amyloid precursor protein, and it keeps all the membranes stable. And so when this perturbation or thump to the neuron happens, then in response, the activation of the microglia is the next thing down the line. So the neuron says to the microglia, I'm in trouble. And the microglia says, okay, and spritzes out a little bit of IL-1 onto the nerve cell, and the nerve cell starts making the repair protein for the membrane, and that's the amyloid precursor protein. Now, I just want to show you this because it's slides. This is a section of the brain from one of Alzheimer's first patients with Alzheimer's disease. And my friend Manuel Greber was in Germany at the time at school. And so he went up there to the lab, and there was an ancient lady there who actually had been just a teenager in Alzheimer's lab. And she helped him find these slides. And then they stained them again with those silver stains. And so this is Alzheimer's brain. And what I saw, you know, I have to confess something. Scientists are always looking for money. So if you have any and you want to have stuff happen that helps you with whatever's wrong with you, then give them money if you can. Because I'm telling you, it's the only thing we have is science and people working. And so when I saw this view right here, the reason I was at this seminar, my friend Marcel Morrison had asked me to come to this seminar. Her boss, Roger Rosenberg, was giving the seminar, and it was for two reasons that she wanted me to come with her. One is they were giving money away at the National Institute on Aging for Alzheimer's work. And so we wanted to get some, of course. And then in addition to that, it was her boss that was talking, so I think she wanted to have a crowd there. Anyway, so I was one of the crowd. And when I saw virtually this identical picture of this is what Alzheimer's looks like in the brain of a person who had Alzheimer's disease. And so seeing this, I thought, holy cow, this is an amyloid plaque. And that's one of the cardinal features of Alzheimer's. When you look at the brain of a person with Alzheimer's, it has a whole bunch of these. And what I thought is having that, I mean, it's like a waste can. It's like a trash bag. It has all kinds of things in it besides the amyloid that's in it. And the amyloid is sticky, and so far we haven't had any ways to get rid of it. And so I thought just its presence here, because it's huge, you know, compared even to a big neuron like this, it's huge. So just because of that and all the, pardon me, crap, I'm sure you don't say that in Rhode Island, but anyway, that stuff that's in there cannot be good for the neuron. And I think that's why the brain makes it into a ball that, you know, stays more out of the way. But it gets in the way of all those processes from neurons 1 to neurons 2, for one thing. And then when you think about it, then I thought, okay, that's going to have a real negative effect on this neuron here. And that is going to cause this microglia to respond. And you know, I was so fortunate because at the time, we only knew about interleukin-1 and interleukin-2. And so it wasn't real hard to figure out that it would be interleukin-1 because you would expect that, because just like in the joint, you know that this macrophage comes, and I didn't tell you the rest of the story, is while your knee is getting well, that macrophage is busily gathering all of the crap that's in the swollen part, in that edema. And also any other foreign stuff, like you got a little bit shaved off of some tendon or shaved off of the bone or something. And the macrophages are working mightily to get rid of that. And just in the same way, or in an analogous way, not the same way, but this interleukin-1 is being released onto this neuron to help however it can. And there are a lot of proteins that I'm not going to talk so much about today, but they themselves are just for goodness. Like there's one alpha-synuclein, and that's to keep that synapse healthy and fine. And so there are all these things, and interleukin-1 drives their synthesis, drives the production of them to make more for this cell that has been thumped, so to speak, by having this big plaque next to it. So I thought, okay, now I've got it. And when the talk was over, I turned to my friend, Marcel, and said, okay, Marcel, I know how it works in Alzheimer's disease. And so I told her, okay, it's these plaques, and they're going to be insulting to the neuron, and that microglia is going to get activated, and it's going to put something onto that neuron that's for the good. And if I'm right, aspirin will cure it. I tell you what, look for it, folks. Aspirin is going to be a part, and we're now making drugs in our group. We have a big drug course, so we have a drug czar, and we have a drug maker, and we have a drug deliverer. So at our place, come on down to Arkansas, we're deep into drugs. But we're working on kinds to do something about Alzheimer's disease. So now, not only does that happen, but the problem is that unlike the peripheral immune system, surely you've all had this, you stick a sticker in your hand. And of course, everybody picks it till you get it out because you can't help it, or your mom does. But if you leave it alone, which is almost impossible, but if you want to try it next time, then if it's near the surface, the macrophages go over to it and gobble up everything. And then, of course, they leave a big amount of white stuff, which we call pus in the small communities. Anyway, so that build up, that is those macrophages go over, eat everything they can, and then drop dead. And that then you'll have the sticker pop out if it's close enough to the surface. That's the end of it. But the brain is not like that. So if you give me just half a minute, I'll tell you why. Because all of your neurons, everything that you know, you had to learn. You have to learn that this is my grandpa, and that other guy is not my grandpa. But the brain is such that you can't get new neurons. And sometimes people talk about it, mice can do it, but I'm telling you, we can't do it. And so, because of that, then the brain is treated differently, and the immune response in the brain is different from the immune response in the periphery. Uses the same molecules, the same proteins in so many instances, but it's different. And the reason is because I remember the picture of my grandpa as uniquely my grandpa. He's not just an old man that might be my grandpa, he's the real thing. And in order for that to happen, you have to have taught since you can't go back in time to learn about your grandpa and remember him, then the brain is fixed. And the way it's fixed is the immune response is allowed, so to speak, to do certain parts, like, can repair a little bit. But in that repair, you're making interleukin-1, for example, and then causing the neuron to make more beta amyloid precursor protein. That's the acute phase. Stand up, we're fixing to do something. And when that happens, it's the beta amyloid precursor protein. So if you put too much IL-1 on there for too long, Then you're in the chronic situation that was on the previous slide. Oops, sorry. The chronic situation. And so you're going to make a circle of this, and in doing that, in making that happen over and over again, then this is the beta amyloid precursor protein that you're stimulating the neuron to make, and that's the beta amyloid that makes this plaque. So that's an example of how, when you have the chronic overexpression of interleukin-1, then you drive the reaction, and you want to keep it where it's just a little reaction. But because the brain is protected from the immune system coming in and just destroying the neuron, then it acts in the gentle way, but it can set up the chronic events that then lead to not only this plaque, but the failure of the system to get rid of unwanted proteins. And one of them is this little blue tack that was holding everything together. When that is inappropriately phosphorylated, put a little phosphate on there, then it will like itself better than it likes the microtubule, and then you no longer have the railroad track to carry down the neurotransmitters, for example. Now here it is when everything's fine, the tacks are holding, and here it is when there's the phosphate reaction happens. And interestingly enough, we found that interleukin-1 also increases, not only increases, but makes the enzyme more active that phosphorylates the little protein called tau that makes up the blue tacks. And when they are phosphorylated, they like each other more than they like the microtubule, and the microtubule falls apart. And in that situation then, you no longer have the proper flow of the proteins that are necessary for the stability of the synapse, and in addition, the neurotransmitters. Now in Alzheimer's, what is the clinical profile? How many people in here have been a caretaker for a person, or now presently caring for a person with Alzheimer's disease? Okay, you will recognize this, and I have not had that terrible burden that you have had, so you could tell me a lot about it. But basically, the stages that the person goes through are called mild, because we always have to have the name for everything. The mild stages, mild cognitive impairment, and then moderate, and then severe. And in the beginning, this area here, this is the temporal lobe right inside your temple there. That area is responsible for learning and memory. And people mostly think about, oh, my memory's still good, and long-term memory is really very long-lasting, et cetera. But the real problem in trying to take care of a person with Alzheimer's disease is the ability to retain a memory long enough. Retaining a memory long enough is if you go to the store and you've got to have these 3 items and you have to have it for tomorrow, you've got to put it in your bag tonight or whatever. And so you got these 3 items. And then you get to the store, and if you are suffering from mild cognitive impairment at all, mild cognitive impairment is not something to take lightly. A person is impaired at that time. But then you can't remember the 3 things. And furthermore, the real problem is, in these situations, you come to this place where an important event for you is happening. Like next week on Tuesday at 10, we are going to the doctor. And that's important because when you're old, you don't have this lot of appointments, especially where you're going to get to see somebody, the authority. And so you think, oh, okay, got it. But you don't have it. And when you're really into mild cognitive impairment, which is more than a little, then you can't remember that. And so you begin to drive the person who cares for you nuts because you keep saying, now when is my doctor's appointment? You know that it's the doctor. You're not forgetting that, but you don't know when your appointment is. And depending on how far you are into your impairment, you will ask closer together. So, 10 times in an hour or 20 times in an hour. And it's so frustrating for the caregiver and for the person too, by the way. And at the same time, you get to that place, like nobody would drive on purpose their daughter or their daughter-in-law crazy. But unfortunately, because of the projections of these neurons to the next station and the next station, then you begin to have these changes here in frontal lobe, that decision-making area. So instead of like your whole life, you've lived it so you wouldn't bother other people, especially, impose on your daughter or the person who's taking care of you, but you lose that. You're not inhibited anymore. And so you just ask and ask and ask. And those symptoms, some people would think of them as, oh, that's not too bad, but live with it for an hour and then you'll find out. And then the moderate stage, and this is really, really so vexing for the person because, we have a lot of matrices in our brain. For example, you know how to do everything. Like, this is like the grandmother who knows how to get everything on the table at Thanksgiving and has been doing it for 50 years. And the turkey comes out and the mashed potatoes are ready and the dressing is ready and the pecan pie was fixed yesterday. So the whole thing is just the thing of beauty. And when you have these involvements like frontal lobe, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't feel comfortable or whatever with really the way that I used to do it. And then the areas of even your memory. So now you're beginning to lose old time memories. And do I put the potatoes in now or should I have made the pecan pie yesterday or what? Anyway, so you can't do these highly complex, and these things are very highly complex. And so maybe you'll appreciate the Thanksgiving dinner more next time after hearing about this and the person who made it. So then the severe stage, these stages, then the person is by and large no longer themselves. And so every area is affected. Even the way you see things, just your kind of memory, like eidetic memory, where you get the picture but you don't know what it means because you don't have this big association area that puts the memories, that puts all your past experience together with what you're seeing. So what increases risk for Alzheimer's disease? So now the next part of the talk is really going to tell you about what we can do about it. And we can do about this too. Brain nerve cell trauma. And I don't know about here, maybe more enlightened. We used to have a helmet law, but then we got more freedom in Arkansas. And so now we don't have to wear a helmet when we're riding our motorcycle at 70 miles an hour. Mostly people do, I think, but I always I give a lecture to second-year students in genetics, and so at the end of my talk, I usually go over and sit down on the table, it's when we're just going to have some discussion, and I say, I just want to remember I want to remind you, and you remember this one thing, that your flag decal won't get you into heaven anymore, but your do-rag will. But you know what? That's almost like if you're lucky, because it can just put you in the nursing home for 35 or 40 years. And so head injury is we're not having it, and we should be thoughtful about all kinds of sports that really favor head injury, because we're now we're reaping the whirlwind of all the things that we put people in danger for head injury, like war and sports. Actually, sports are so wonderful, so I'm not speaking against them, but we have to be thoughtful about everything that we do, and especially with our children and big grown kids. And then there are the lifestyle risks that all of us can suffer from or not, and those are obesity. Now, obesity is one thing, and there's a thing that goes with it, virtually always, and that's type 2 diabetes. And if you have obesity, you're more likely to have type 2 diabetes. And if you do, then your risk for having Alzheimer's disease is as high as having the risky gene I'm going to tell you about in a second. And that means it's going to increase your probability, of having Alzheimer's disease by about 10, 12, 15 times. And so it's worth paying attention to. Guard your head, mind your head, and also keep straight. Be a straight up guy. So no obesity, and then probably you won't have type 2 diabetes. And when I first came to Arkansas, I actually was stationed, had my lab over at Arkansas Children's Hospital, because the chairman of PEDS saw the importance of my work. And at that moment, NIA was not seeing the importance of my work because it was completely new, and it's very hard to get a new idea across. And but that didn't last long, so don't feel worried about it. But in this interim, one of the reasons I went to Arkansas from Southwestern in Dallas was because the guy told me, if you come here, if they don't fund you, I will. And I knew about him that he had the money, and as we said in Texas, the cojones to actually do that thing. And so that's the reason I went to PEDS at the UAMS. And at that time, we had absolutely no clinic. Of course we had no clinic for childhood type 2 diabetes, because it was called old age diabetes, period. And so there weren't any clinics. And now we have multiple clinics, because we have these children that, I have to say it, they're allowed to be cubes. And so we have clinics for them. So they're suffering from type 2 diabetes. And it is a big risk factor for developing Alzheimer's disease. And I want to tell you, because I think somebody else will not tell you, but the real problem with obesity and type 2 diabetes, the real scary part, and I think that's one of the things when you don't want to have science-based information, you don't want to know the facts, then you'll miss this. But actually what happens in obesity and type 2 diabetes, people with that, when they get to be, say, 60, then they have the real clinker, which is things like cancers, liver cancer and pancreatic cancers. So, we have to keep all the facts on the table so that when we talk like this, and you just don't know how magic it is to have people from the community who come to hear. So I think when you come to hear, then I have to tell you what I see and have seen. And basically, so these are the reasons why we don't want to have ourselves or our children. And basically, when you look at a family and you look at old pictures and you see everybody, like in my family on both sides, part of it was we had no money. But anyway, we're all just sort of straight up and down these beanpole kind of people. And so, there's not some genetic reason why my nieces should be obese, but they are. And one of them, well, they have type 2 diabetes when they are obese. And so one of them is already, succumbed really to the 60-year-old disease. So we have to tell each other, we have to support knowing the facts about what is happening to us and our children. And that's very important. Oh, I forgot, the risky gene. As I was saying, you inherit from your mom and your dad one gene for everything. Your beauty, your hair color, everything, one from your dad, one from your mom. And this gene, if you happen to have inherited ApoE4, then you're at increased risk for Alzheimer's disease. And in our lab, we just showed why that's the case. But what I want to tell you is this little gene, there are 3 variants of it. One of them is ApoE2, and then the other one ApoE3, and the other one ApoE4. So if you happen to inherit both copies of ApoE4, then your increased risk is about the same as obesity with type 2 diabetes. And just keeping that in mind for a little bit, so having these risk factors that I just told you about, then I wanted to tell you a little bit about Rhode Islanders. And you can look this up. This is the wonder. I mean, it's so amazing, the progress. Like in my lifetime, of course, we were, still inventing the wheel. But anyway, this is incredible. You can look up what you don't know. And so I'm telling you, you can look all of these statistics up, which is, of course, I was coming here. So I had to know. And this is what I found out. You're not very different from us. I mean, of course, we are fat and lazy in the South, but it's not all of us. Rhode Island is pretty much like us. Maybe we are worse, I can tell you. We used to be number 1. A lot of things in Arkansas were number 1 or number 50, whichever, if it's the good thing, or number 50. Okay, and then, so this is the way it is in Rhode Island. 27% of you all are obese. And you know what astounded me? I didn't look it up for Arkansas, but I'm telling you, this happened since 2000. That's not very long. Up 17% since 2000. I mean, you could have all been skinny. You are, actually. I'm looking over you. I looked at every one of you, except the people that came there at the end. I looked at every one of you as I was waiting to finally be introduced. I thought about my tap dancer, but my knee. So but anyway, and this is similar to what's happening in the rest of the country. So I'm telling we are going to be living in Fatsville pretty quickly, actually like in 20 years for sure. These projections match those for 80 risks, so I'm just telling you. And here's a picture of it. I have one like this for Arkansas, and so I just got a map on Google again, look and you can find anything. And so then I put in the oblong there, rectangle, I put the total population, which is 1.05 plus a little bit, million, and of that there's 522,000 women, or maybe today and tomorrow, maybe 1 or 2 more or less. But I put that on there because of every 3 people with Alzheimer's disease, 2 of them are women. And it's very important to find out why that's the case. And we have a friend that's working on it, Robbie Brinton. Anyway, then in the population 70 to 74, which is a big time for Alzheimer's and people to develop Alzheimer's. And there are almost 14,000 of those. And that's 13% of the total of the whole state of population. And then the ones with Alzheimer's right now, 23,000. And I want to tell you another little factoid. And no matter what anybody says, facts, if you don't know the facts about things, then you are more ignorant than if you do know the facts. So here is the fact about the budget. And the budget, of course, recently has been really hot on the news. And in this news, this is what I can tell you, that we now have 5.5 million people with Alzheimer's in the US. And it costs the government part. Now, this is not talking about the caregiver who often has to leave the job that they work on, so you lose taxes and you lose their productivity and goodness for the country. And that costs us, because we pay the taxes, that's all the money the government has, taxes. And so we pay the taxes, and it cost $250 billion this year. And we know about what trillions of dollars are because we've been talking about it just recently in the news. And so $250 billion is going to care for people with Alzheimer's disease. And I just want to tell you that right now, the government has for the study of Alzheimer's disease, finding out the facts on what's going on there and what are the drivers of this ongoing disease in a person. That is about 1.4 billion. So I'm telling you, we're not fighting on the same level. So we need to have more money from the government for the important aspects that the government funds for things that are so devastating and cost the government and us, the people that love the people with Alzheimer's and take care of them. It costs all of their effort and all of their heart and then all of their money. And one of the reasons it's really important if you don't have Alzheimer's to give money to people who are studying Alzheimer's and doing helpful things for caregivers. And that's because if you don't have it, you're lucky. And so you should be contributing as much as you can to help that, even in science or in helping with caregiver problems. And these kinds of things are so important because we need to know the facts about them and we need to know how we can take care of ourselves. And this is something that now we're going to talk about prevention. How can we, in ourselves, we've talked a little bit, quite a bit about it with regard to obesity and type 2 diabetes. And so this is the cover of Newsweek in 2016. And they caught up with us, people like Paula and with me, about prevention. And now they're finally saying, oh gosh, maybe we do things to prevent this, like you don't get obese, don't get type 2 diabetes, don't hit your head, etc. So now what we're going to do is educate, and that's the big thing. And what we can do is we can eat right, and in that way, lower inflammation. And I told you, IL-1 is the driver of what's happening. When it becomes chronic, it's the driver of the seed proteins for that big plaque and the tangled up proteins that are inside the neuron. And so here, eat this. Everybody in Arkansas, or no, not enough people in Arkansas, but a lot of people know what this green vegetable is here. It's collard greens. And there are all different kinds of greens. Cook them up with a lot of fat. And now people worry about fat. I'm telling you, they worry about it, but it's the sugar industry did a little number on us to make fats look real bad, so everybody got scared. So they gave up on their collard greens because they couldn't put grease on them. And so, but you've got to eat these greens, and you've got to eat all the kinds of vegetables, all the colored ones, every kind of vegetable is good, and also the spices. And I don't mean just hot, but spicy foods. And then, of course, all the colors of the fruits. And I put diabetes there because some people, diabetes is so bad that they even have to watch the sugar that they get from fruits. And then exercise. And exercise, of course, is so good for lowering inflammation. It also gives me a chance to say something. I was just bowled over and so happy, made so happy by a study that they did recently showing that people who get together, go to the gym, and exercise, even if they have mild cognitive impairment, they improve. And now there's two good things about that. It may be that it's the socialization has a good aspect on that, and it's hard to study that aspect. And then the other aspect that's very wonderful, I think, is the caregiver has a little respite. And so these two things together, and the one where the guy that's exercising is lowering their inflammation. And it may be that the caregiver's lowering their inflammation by having a quiet spell. And this is something that we can do, but you have to be careful. Don't drop them because you don't want to get head injury. If you're old and you have a head injury, that is not good. And then in addition to that, so don't fall either, okay? So be careful, but don't walk too slowly. That's the thing. And remember, it's never too late. And I know that because of the study, even people with cognitive impairment can be made to be better. And then you got to take care of the young ones. And this is the responsibility. And very unfortunately, people don't live close to their family. So their grandma is not 2 doors down from them. And so you can't have this, continual lecture. And I know that people may have disagree with this, but I think that we're supposed to have, with people we love, we're supposed to have an ongoing conversation. It should not be filled with hours of no talking. And we definitely need to be doing that with our children and our grandchildren. Always be telling them something. Don't lean on the car door. Don't chew up your corn. It's coming summertime. And so you have to educate them in every way that you can. And you know how to do it. And if you're a grandmother or a grandpa, then you really know how to do it. And the grandpa is so important because for reasons we women have never figured out, it's just, they're more attracted to the dad and they're more attracted to the grandpa. So you have a big burden, then you have to be the one that helps teach them. And then there's the other thing. You have to keep learning yourself, keep reading and doing whatever you want to do that exercises your mind. Get out in the open, get out where there are people. So keep yourself learning stuff. And then in addition to that, you have to really love yourself. And this is biblical. I grew up as a Southern Baptist Sunday school girl, so I know a lot of verses. And this one is one of my favorites, is you have to love yourself and you have to be merry because you love yourself and you love other people. A merry heart doeth good like a medicine. And don't go postponing your hopes either, because there's the other verse that says, hopes postponed sickeneth the heart. So we have to stay where we are in a position with ourselves. We can love ourselves so that we can love other people. And then you can have this feeling that I'm doing the best I can. And all of these things are so natural to all of us. It's not hard to do. We have to see to each other, and we have to take care of our kids for sure. It's just been so wonderful to talk to you about these kinds of evidences of what's happening. But there is hope. And part of the hope is in the Ryan Institute and the Reynolds Institute and other workers around the whole world, actually. And just as Paula was saying, there's no talk given anywhere anymore that they don't talk about neuroinflammation. And that's what we're doing right here at the Ryan and at home in Arkansas at the Reynolds. And this is the group, and I want to point out some of them. This is the best thing. You should get old and still have these kids around you. This is Sundrum. Oh, I have to tell you, this is our big group right here. And this is Steve Barger, who's the one that found out what the signal protein is from the neuron to the microglia to say, help, I'm in trouble. And that's Steve Barger right there. And he was late for the photograph of everybody. And so he ran into the picture, and he was running right straight for me. I'm right there with my mouth open, as usual. So he comes running and jumps up on the table, slides right over, and then of course the guy is so quick, he took the picture. I would have missed the picture because I would have been startled. Anyway, so this is our whole group, and in our big group under the program project, there are 29 of us. 16 are immigrants. Our immigrants are sweeping the floor with us. I mean, I'm telling you, hard work, smart. And our non-immigrants are sweeping the floor, and they are smart and hardworking because we're all invigorated by knowing that we have this chance to do something. So we're now with our drug, and this is one of our immigrants right here. That's Dr. Peter Crooks. He's our drug czar. And he and his group, and they're all clustered around him here, those people are the ones that are doing the drug design and modeling. And then Sundrum here, Sundrum is this incredible guy. He's a bioinformaticist. And what they do ordinarily is they look at big data sets about stuff, like, what's selling, what's, everything. And so he's an expert at that, of course. He has his PhD in that. And then he decided, I'm really interested in how these molecules interact in the brain, for example, and in the brain when you have neurodegenerative diseases. So then he learned how to model molecules. So he has and these are not just draw it. They are based on the amino acid sequence of that protein. So he knows what it looks like when it's folded in the right configuration. And he also knows, with the guys in the drug core, where the protein, the drug, is more likely to sit so that you can prevent the phosphorylation of that little blue tack, and it won't form the tangle. So, then we do prediction modeling. So we have the molecule, and then we put the drug in the spot that should be the right place. And then we try it in cells, like neurons in culture, glia in culture. And then we also try it, this is Dr. Reese, in C. elegans. That's an animal model, a worm. And then we transfect the worm, so then it's an Alzheimer's worm or a Parkinson's worm or a Huntington's worm. And then we try these drug strategies on these animals. And then, of course, we have the mouse studies. And Steve Barger, here on the table, he works on the aspect that we talked a lot about, which is diet, what you're eating, high-fat, high-sugar diets, like we eat here in America, and how that has an interaction on the brain itself, and actually from the brain down to type 2 diabetes and the manifestations of obesity in the body. And then I'm telling you about these people because these are the kind of people that are on the front line of drug development and going after specific amino acids that are the critical spots on these proteins, like the tau protein or the amyloid protein, so we can make specific drugs that will just go after that, just go after the offending protein. And here, this is Dr. Schrenny, and he is the person, I went to him one day and I said, this way we're doing this is just so laborious, I can't stand it, it's driving everybody in the lab nuts. And he said, I've been thinking about that, and he said, there's another way, I think we can do it. And so on the spot, he just tells me, okay, I think we can do it this way, and he shows, pull down the drug with the molecule, etc. And he devises this little way of doing it, and in 3 days we were able to do something that we'd been taking a month to do previously. So the ingenuity is so important and worth supporting. And then, of course, I have to talk about the stars here. This is Paul Parkon. He's my MD, PhD, and I can claim him until Saturday when he graduates with his MD and his PhD. And lucky for us, he's going to do his residency at Arkansas, so we still get to claim him. And this is Sundram. And when you're sitting like I was doing there, you're sitting there and they're talking to each other. And all of these people are talking around you. And it's just like, the wonderful. It's the best thing. You hear these people coming up with, this is the way, we could try that. Or I can predict whether or not that'll happen. So it's magic. And that's all. It's magic. And we're so lucky that we get support from so many people at home that love us, and then we have our big program projects. And these programs are worth $1 million to $2 million a year. But that is not enough to support a big program, even like our program. So we have to have support from our donors, and these are their names, the Wingate, the Johnson, the Oppenheimer Brothers, and the Riggs Brother Foundation. And then we had the Stop Alzheimer's campaign. And so when people are talking to you and it's your home, like when Paula's talking to you, it's your home person. You have that here in Rhode Island, in Providence. And so when they're talking to you, then what we did, we were talking to our people. And the way we started on this, and this is something else about having a lot of smart people around you. So Paul, my graduate student, and I were sitting one night talking, and we knew that was when NIH only had 900 million for the Alzheimer's studies, 900 million for this big thing that costs a piece of $1 trillion. So I knew we were going to have to be out for a year. We wouldn't get the money for the program. And so we were feeling a little bit hot under the seat of what's going to happen next. And so I said, well, let's start a campaign. And I decided right off, let's call it Stop Alzheimer's. And so he was sitting at my desk, and he got on and bought everything, go to GoDaddy and all these things. I don't know. Anyway, so it's the beauty of having people around you that know things that you don't know and can do things that, definitely you can't do if you're me. And so in that day, and then, by the time a month and a half had gone by, we were already talking about we're going to have a forum and we're going to talk to the public about what we're doing here. And we did. And so in that year, we raised $1 million, and we raised $700,000 in about 3 months. And so, doing these kinds of innovative things, then that's when you're at home, and the people that work here are your home people. They're your champions, and so it's worth supporting them. And this is not a call for support from you, but it kind of is, because it's ignorant to talk about things. If we were business people, we'd definitely be talking about the money. So we are business people in a way. But it's just been such a pleasure. Everybody I've met, I love them. They're just great. And I can't believe that Paula is so lucky. Like me, we have the best people. So thank you so much.